Tell me how to pronounce
Welcome
your
to
name.
another edition of the Trahern Crews show.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Uh-uh.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Still can't hear you.
Um, Try taking your headphones out.
I heard you before.
Can you hear me now?
Nope.
Not yet. Okay. One,
My
two.
speaker is on, so
I can hear you.
you can hear me.
Yeah.
I cannot hear you at all.
You're muted now.
Now I can hear you. Okay.
Okay, great.
Technology.
There we go. Welcome to another edition of the Trahern Crews show. We have a very special guest, Pamela Denise Long. She's a political consultant. Say hello to the people.
Hi, I'm glad to be here, Trahern. I'm glad to have a conversation with you tonight.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for coming out and talking to us. Where are you from exactly?
From is a little complicated, but I'll give you the short answer. I was born and raised in Mississippi for the most part, spent some time outside of Chicago growing up in my early teen years. Headquarters for me is in the St. Louis region. So and have moved all around the country, but I'm a Mississippi girl at heart.
No doubt. I love Mississippi.
Ah, okay. You got family there as well?
Yeah, I do have some family in Mississippi.
Okay, so I'm Northwest Mississippi, Shelby, Clarksdale, Cleveland sort of area.
Okay. Today they just announced that there was some classified documents that President Biden had. Do you think there is a contradiction in the way it was handled with Trump and Biden?
I think the short answer is yes. I think that Donald Trump ignited a pushback from the left and eventually some elements on the right, like I think only Barack Obama has in recent presidential sort of history. Honestly, when I heard about the documents that President Trump had after his tenure as presidency, I was not surprised that any president or even other people working in government would actually have documents in their possession. I'm kind of surprised that there are so many things that are on paper that could be, misplaced or misfiled or taken home or whatever the case may be. There are so many things that are on paper that could be, misplaced or misfiled. I'm not sure if did you hear it echo? That's why.
I got it. Okay. We're straight. We got it.
Cool. So I'm not surprised about it. I think that people's hair is not on fire as it was with Donald Trump. I think even when everything was coming out about former President Trump's documents that had been secured, I do believe, in a secure location, or at least had been reinforced, fortified. There was information that came out that even President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, had a significant number of documents that were kept sort of in a public storage area, is how I understood it. So none of it surprises me. Both the reaction to Biden, relatively softer reaction to Biden, nor the fact that anyone who'd worked in government would have documents that reflect the security and sensitivity of those documents will reflect the level of that person's position in power. So, of course, he might have documents that were so-called classified, which can run a broad range of topics.
And so how I ran into you, or I seen you on TV and you were talking about Black Americans in the Republican Party. Now, I'm not saying you were advocating for the Republican Party, but do you think more Black Americans should join the Republican Party?
Yeah, so I think the interviews that you may have seen were with the piece that I wrote I think it was 22 maybe, or late 21, I can't remember now, that basically said that Black Americans need to divorce the Democratic Party. I believe that to be true. I think we've been married to the Democratic Party in a way that has prevented us from exploring our political options as Black Americans. And that's what I've essentially been advocating for. I do make it clear in all the spaces that I'm in that I've been a member of the Republican Party. It's the only party that I've officially joined. And when I say officially, I mean, I paid dues and attended regular meetings and that kind of stuff. And I joined during Barack Obama's first presidential campaign. So I am not necessarily advocating that we should divorce one party and marry another. What I am saying is that what we need to do is not feel like we're in an exclusive relationship with the Democratic Party, and we need to be advocating for the interest of Black America, and by extension, America itself, with all people and all parties that have power or aspire to have power. I think we need to embrace the fact that Black Americans are a swing vote. Democrats cannot win an election without us, and Republicans would win more elections more easily with us. Of course, there are things that both parties need to do in terms of both promises as well as delivery on those promises.
Indeed. Talking about some of the promises, what are some of the policies that Democrats have put out that you think are harmful? And what are some policies that people might not know about Republicans or are there any policies that Republicans have that Black people should be interested in?
Yeah, so let's start with the first, Democrats and harmful policies. I think the current iteration of Democrats being it feels like unable, but I'll say unwilling to disentangle the specific needs of Black Americans from the rest of their serial list of interest groups is problematic. I offer that and give an example of Kamala Harris saying she wasn't going to do anything that only benefits Black people, while we've seen every aspiring elected official and even current elected official get behind the mic and they offer specific and promise specific policies and appropriations, money, to every other group specifically with their name on it. And they don't dovetail Black Americans into it at all. And the idea for Democrats who literally depend upon the Black vote to win, for them to be unable to say Black period and not add a comma and add a whole bunch of other people to what should be rightly ours is problematic to me. And what that says to me is that you're weak and you're unable to advocate for Black Americans and what we need, which differs from what other groups need. And it allows other groups to shoehorn their interests into the equity that's due to the people who built this nation from a forest into a beacon on the hill. In terms of other policies, immigration, which you know that I focus on in a lot of my writings as well. And then the other thing that's embedded with what I said before is the ways that Democrat policies shoehorn other groups into the specific interests of Black Americans. In terms of Republican policies that Black Americans should be focused on, I think when you think about Republicans, you tend to think about business and money. And for me, if it don't make dollars and economic sense for Black Americans, then we shouldn't trifle with it. And I think we need to make it very clear to the Republican Party what our specific economic interests are. I've written an article for Newsweek, for example, that Republicans should be leading the call for reparations to the descendants of United States slaves, just as our party was, when it was first started with Abraham Lincoln and the radical Republicans and the like. And the reason for that is what Democrats do is they give you these piecemeal programs that you come to depend upon that address the poverty that, 100 years of slavery in the formal United States and then 100 other years of Jim Crow have created, and the discrimination that happens today. We can get rid of a lot of those practices, those policies, those piecemeal tax credits and the like by closing the lineage-based wealth gap that is directly result of slavery and Jim Crow and anti-Black American discrimination. And that requires some courage And I believe really revisiting the conservative and Republican principles and applying them to the Black American community if Republicans are going to reinvigorate their historically significant relationship with Black Americans, which I advocate for the party to do. In addition to reparations, the reality is that Republicans tend to be pro-business. There are plenty of Black Americans who start businesses, but many of the funds for those businesses, if you're listening to Democrats, it becomes minorities. It becomes people of color. And so those dollars that should be going to native-born Americans, to be quite honest with you, and Black Americans in particular, who've been grossly underserved historically, get lost with all the people of color-ness. Republicans tend to be focused on the money element of things. And I would even say, to some extent, how are we going to the implementation of economic, especially independently driven, business-oriented economic endeavors. I frankly liked President Trump's his platinum plan, even though I felt like there were some elements there that needed to be more specific to who it was going to, where it was going. I'm not a particular fan of so-called economic revitalization initiatives that further gentrification and that bring people into the community to benefit economically, rather than I want to see policies that benefit the people who are already in and have been in the community overall.
Agreed. Now, I just have because when we just had Joe Biden, he just had they had the presidency, they had the House. We didn't see much for Black Americans come down for. So basically, that I'm not going to say it was a waste, but wow. But then on the other side, just this week, we got Black Republicans like Larry Elder speaking out against reparations, and another guy. How do we, if Black Americans are to, flirt with the Republican Party, how do we deal with the Larry Elders?
I think you deal with the Larry Elder just like you deal with the Democrat who doesn't necessarily want to see reparations for Black Americans, or someone in the UK, for example. Then they just put a hit piece out on Dr. Darity.
Wow.
You deal with all of them the same way. You make the case and you make the argument. Many Black Americans that I've interacted with are very steeped in the history of the United States that warrants reparations, the extractive relationship between Black Americans, descendants of slaves, and the United States. So make the case. We think people know this history. They really don't. We think people know what to do with the history. They really don't. We think people understand reparations. Some people do, some people don't. We also think people understand the history of reparations in the United States, and we really don't understand what those things mean. And then there are just going to be some people who, no matter how cogent, well put together your logic is, how cogent your argument is, they're never going to want to see a come up, and they're going to want to think, well, what about me? Because I've had hardships as well. And this isn't about the hardships of all people. This is about the extractive relationship, the injurious relationship, the negligent relationship, the malicious relationship at times that America has had with the descendants of United States slaves, or American freedmen, as we call them, who were emancipated to today.
Wow. Thank you for that answer. Personally, or even just looking out, who would you say has been a better president for Black Americans? Not just, even just looking at all the numbers and everything that's going on, Biden or Trump?
Now, that is a fascinating question. I can't look at President Trump's one-term presidency without noting the fact that in 2020, all hell broke loose economically and socially and the like, because of COVID-19 and all that required. And during his time, because of COVID-19 and the ways in which people were basically in their houses scared to go outside, right? Because we didn't know what it was and what it meant. We were required to stay home, right? Literally. We lost, I believe, 40% of Black businesses were shuttered.
Wow.
And so,
wow.
Yeah. And so
forget about that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even me sometimes. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I can't evaluate his presidency without taking that into account. I can't evaluate anything Joe Biden does without taking into account the deleterious effect that he has had on Black American families in his 50 years as a public figure, public servant, if you will, from his hobnobbing with explicit racist segregationists to his anti-Black American statements during his time in the legislature and literally on the floor of our Congress. And so I don't think Joe Biden has done nearly enough in his 2 years as president for Black Americans. I think the short answer to your question is Donald Trump. Biden has opened the floodgates to our border. We've had anywhere from 2 million confirmed. The last time I actually looked at the data through the Federal Immigration Center, 2 million people just brought on across the border that we know of. And then up to 5 million people as FAIR, which is an immigration reduction moderation organization, as they've proposed, have been brought into the country. Those people directly compete with Black Americans who do not have a high school diploma. About 73-ish% of Black Americans don't have a high school diploma, and about 60-some-odd% of white Americans don't, particularly white men and Black men. Those illegal immigrants directly compete with Black Americans for jobs. We've known that since 2007, at the very least. We've known the impact that has, the impact that illegal immigration has on Black incarceration, because unemployed people don't tend to spend their time, unemployed people in inner cities where there are no options, you're constantly competed out of a job. People have to find a way to make ends meet. And there are ways in which people find unhealthy ways to occupy their time. If those people weren't here, we'd have less competition for jobs, and we'd have higher wages because companies would want to attract workers by offering them the very reason that people work, which is generally for pay. Donald Trump, to carry forth with the immigration argument, Donald Trump strongly enforced our border. What we saw is that people who were here illegally realized they needed to self-deport, meaning when Trump said, I'm enforcing the border and I just want y'all to know that I'm coming for you, people actually left the country themselves rather than us having to pay to get them back to their country. We also saw that with the raids on those poultry plants in Mississippi, and South Carolina and a couple other places, that Black Americans who had been willfully fired and replaced with illegals got those jobs. This is Mississippi, where such jobs that are paying $20, $25 an hour just aren't like all over the place. So I would say Donald Trump, hands down. And I think even Trump spoke more positively about Black Americans than did Obama, who tends to seem to want to lecture Black Americans, especially Black American men. And certainly since Biden, who lectured Charlemagne that, if you ain't sure you want to vote for me, you ain't really Black.
Wow. So. Yeah. Well, let me push back a little bit on the play the devil's advocate real quick. Well, some people will say, well, we're all immigrants. I've heard that before. And then some people will say, well, what about Ketanji Jackson and Kamala Harris?
So, wow. Let me ask a clarifying question. Tell me about Ketanji Brown Jackson's lineage and her immigrant status, because I don't think most people are even clear on whether she's an immigrant or if she is a descendant of U.S. slaves or if she's a mix of the two. Wow. Are we clear on that? Because I don't think people are very clear, and I think in some ways they've sort of scrubbed that element of her personal background. So Kamala is obviously not a descendant of U.S. slaves. She is the first person in her family who, I believe she was born in the United States, or she's born in Canada, actually, wasn't she? I can't remember.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a complicated narrative for me to keep track of. But anywho, we're not all immigrants. For multiple reasons, including those of us who know and understand our connection to chattel slavery. Many of us do have African ancestors who were brought here in chains. Many of us also, Black Americans I'm speaking of in particular, also have ancestors who are native and or aboriginal to this land, right? And so the idea that I'm an immigrant, that I willfully moved from my homeland to another land, does not apply at all to descendants of United States slaves. And, you know, also many of us have ancestry, if you will, that are connected to the other Aboriginal Black people in this world, including folks who are in the South Pacific, because they also traded those people here and the like. So I think I loved the best retort to this idea that we're all immigrants, I think, came from recently from Dr. Umar, who said, where I am not an immigrant, I am an import. And particularly, I was imported here. My ancestors were imported here to build this nation. And now I need repair for the harm that has been caused to us over the 400 plus years of having to do so. And I have no problem. I personally have no problem. I think Black Americans need to become really fluent in not feeling the need to include folks like Kamala Harris and other people who are not descendants of US slaves in our advocacy. We do not have to continue to carry and build the world. We do not have to be slaves to the interests of the world, nor every Black person, while we are trying to get healed and repaired from the harm that has been caused to us. And I think for other people to demean, to ridicule our self-advocacy in the midst of all that we've been through and are going through is kind of disgusting to me. I know that's a strong word, but it is repulsive to think that as we are addressing 250 years, if you include Britain's involvement in slavery here, because they ceded the United States, right? 250 years of slavery plus another 100 years of formal discrimination in vile ways, lynching, rapes, the whole thing. And then 50 years, another 50 years of discrimination, which research shows just in the last 20 years alone has cost the US GDP and economic factors, what was it, some 20 billion or trillion dollars? Exactly. Yeah. So to ridicule me for wanting to be repaired for that harm that includes me, right? Because I've been here for the last 20 years. And I know my lived experience, not just philosophically, but actually what I've been through. I think it's just really disgusting to think that we shouldn't seek repair for that.
Thank you. And I think I already know your stance on reparations, so I don't think we don't have
to check. Check, sir.
Yeah. But something else I've seen you talking about, the role of artificial intelligence in the Black community.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I did it earlier today. I did an interview with Newsweek about AI. And particularly, we were talking about this, robot McDonald's, as they're calling it, where your food is brought out to you on this, dumbwaiter kind of thing, mobile robot, while people in the back are cooking. So there are a couple things around AI. First of all, it's obviously tech industry stuff. It's been interesting to talk with people who've been displaced in tech, displaced by outsourcing, as well as visas, bringing people in. So we're bleeding tech jobs overall in America, and particularly Black Americans. And it's been interesting to talk to people who watched the sort of tech boom happen. And what they've been saying is a lot of Black men were taking those jobs earlier on in tech, electrical engineering, coding, and all of that, because they were considered nerdy jobs, right? And so it wasn't the cool thing to do. So there were many Black folk who were doing it. And, you think about, one of my friends was talking to me about this, and they were talking about Samuel L. Jackson being the tech guy in the original Jurassic Park. And they were like, if you made that movie today, the tech guy being Black would feel a little like, yeah, maybe, but more than likely he'd be Indian. right? And there's nothing wrong with Indians. That's not what I'm saying for the people who hear this and are kind of special. But the point being that the evolution of migration in the tech industry has really displaced all Americans, and especially Black Americans in the tech area, where we were really dominating in that area before. And with that, I think with AI being something that is going to happen more and more for convenience as well as efficiency, I would love to see more Black Americans get involved with coding, with areas that support automation, understanding it even from an analytic perspective, from the standpoint of, what are going to be the social implications for humans, for individuals, for our nation economically, when we get to more and more automation. And if we're going to go the automated route, what do we do with our people, and how do we employ them in a way that's going to contribute positively to society, and also ensure that they're independent and being able to make ends meet for their households. So I'd love to see Black Americans do more in the tech area overall. And I don't know what it takes to do that. I do think we need to have an internal labor sourcing plan from the federal level as well as state levels. I'd also like to see more HBCUs be partnering with big tech organizations and innovation hubs and the like to prepare Black Americans for what comes ahead, and even to be on the bleeding edge of deciding what the future looks like.
Wow, indeed. And then my last question, and then sometimes we have a roundtable discussion every Sunday. So the next time you're free on a Sunday, we're going to try to get you into that, get a new perspective into this roundtable discussion.
Thank you.
Humane anti-racism training. Can you tell us about that? And if anybody wants to sign up or contact you, how can they do that? Or tell us about it first.
Yeah. So, the Humane Anti-Racism training is something that I offer through the company Youth Centrics. Youth Centrics is a consulting organization, and of course, training and capacity building of staff is part of that. I came into the work of anti-racism probably formally 10 years ago. And it was because of some things that my own child was experiencing around race. I didn't grow up thinking about race and racism, even though I grew up in Mississippi. I know that surprises people. It's just very true. It just wasn't part of my experience, racism on a personal level, right? Obviously, the system of it was all around me because I lived in a segregated town, even though I didn't know that at the time either. It just is what it is, right? But I came to study anti-racism probably around that time. And I went back to school, got my master's in educational psychology, because I wanted to understand how people learn and unlearn their racial identity. That's what a lot of my coursework involved, my papers and all of those kinds of things, even my capstone project for that. And now I'm finishing my doctorate in organizational development. And the focus of that, thank you. The focus of that is on executive leadership and leading the implementation of anti-racism system-wide. And so I've been doing training and consulting around trauma-informed practices with the bent toward, systemic issues, and racism being a trauma for many. And so the humane anti-racism approach is really looking at, rather than pointing the finger and or blame and or getting white folks to admit that, they're all racist, I want to say, how do we get to changing the levers within systems and within ourselves that create citizens that are able to live up to the poetry on paper, all men created equal, all those things, and to become people who have the capacity to disrupt discrimination and bias when they see it. So the humane anti-racism approach, which is trademarked for the organization, is really focused on changing the things that need to be changed without ever getting into finger pointing and blame and shame and making people feel bad. But it's also centering relationships, right? It's building people's capacity to have those difficult conversations and really start to understand the people in their circle of concern and influence first. And when you can do that, then you can start to have conversations in a broader sort of perspective. And that can start to shape how you show up as a leader who's setting policy, practice, supervision requirements, HR policy, and the like. So typically the Humane Anti-Racism course is purchased by organizations in bulk. So they'll purchase, for all of their executive team or even the organization wide, but individuals can purchase the course as well. It's available for a year. They have access to it for a year and then they can maintain it. But the idea is to get people to complete the process. And with the Humane Anti-Racism training with the organizations, I do weekly group coaching where we go over the content, where people come together to ask questions. It's very much a safe and brave space where you can ask the questions and won't be judged for asking them. But the whole goal is to build your capacity to be the change, very cliche, but also true, that you want to see and that we desperately need in our country.
Indeed. Thank you for coming on the show tonight. We're going to start trying to have you back on as soon as possible.
Thank you.
For people who want to get in touch with you or see this interview, they want to learn more about Humane Anti-Racism training or just interview, what's a good contact you feel comfortable giving out?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple things. One, you can always follow me on Twitter and reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open, and that's at P Denise Long. So at P Denise Long. You can visit my website to link to the Humane Anti-Racism training and also get an idea of the professional development training and consulting, implementation consulting that happens there. That's www.youthcentrics.com. That's youthcentrix.com.
Thank you so much for coming on and taking some time out your day. I know you're busy to sit down and talk to the Trahern Crews show. We'll be reaching out to talk to you more.
My pleasure, Trahern. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a blessed weekend.
You as well.
Peace. And that was Denise Long. Doing great work out here. Make sure that you get in contact with her soon. Thank you all for tuning in to another edition of the Trahern Crews show. This program will be rebroadcasted on www.blacktvs.com or Black Watch Television on your Roku channel this Sunday at 8 p.m. Thank you for tuning in. Have a prosperous rest of your week. Peace.